I don't know why you can't see it.
Louis, how much time do you want to have upfront warning signals? 5 minutes earlier when time is up, or?
Can you see it now?
No?
No, still, Julia. Could it be you're like pointing to the wrong or sharing the wrong screen, or it's
And
now
it's
a
screen.
so
it's
My connection is very bad at the moment, so maybe it's
now
that's the reason I
now it works.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
because I think my connection is very bad. It could be that my connection is off at any time, I don't know, but there's another colleague of mine who is there, and maybe she can then share the screen and talk about it. I hope that it's okay. I have a hotspot of my hand with my handy now, but yeah.
Sometimes it helps if you then just turn off the camera when you do the screen sharing. That you don't do both.
Yes, but now you see my screen, right?
We have people coming into the room, so I think we should wrap up that now. Hi, Carlo.
Hey, how are you?
Okay, so we have still a Julia, can you stop the screen share? Nadia, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Is she frozen, or is that, do you know what is going on?
Wait a minute, I'll try to stop. Wait a minute, it's from Julia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think we are in time, 4:30. So I just have one quick question. Anna, can you give me time as well, about 3 minutes before I finish?
Sure, I'll do that.
So then everything is organized, and I think we can slowly start. So welcome all to our session, which is in a late afternoon slot on a Friday evening. So we highly appreciate that you are here. So we talk again about behavior economics and nature in the lab, and we have Ana Lu Abatayo, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Julia Amelie Hoppe, Luis Fernando Silva e Silva, and me, Ann-Kathrin Kössler, and I would just hand over to Anna to start with her presentation.
Sure, thank you, Ann-Kathrin, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. So to start things off, to start things off, let me start with this quote from the United Nations World Social Report in 2020. So the quote says that within countries, people living in poverty and other vulnerable groups, including smallholder farmers, indigenous peoples, and rural coastal populations, are more exposed to climate change and incur greater losses from it while having fewer resources which to cope and recover. So in fact, in everyday life, heterogeneous returns to public goods and to public bads are more often the norm rather than the exception. So there is heterogeneous returns to public goods and public bads across individuals within a country, but also across individuals in different countries. So if you take a look at this graph here, you will see that the global distribution of population in the world can really be divided into two groups. You have individuals here living in countries with high GDPs like the US, Japan, and China, who are really responsible for 80% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And then you have individuals here with low GDPs, Indonesians, Indians, and Nigerians, and they are the ones who suffer the most in terms of losses in log GDP per capita, so in individual income, due to the negative effects of climate change. In fact, Indonesians, Indians, and Nigerians the effect of climate change to these people might be so detrimental that these individuals might not have an incentive to free ride on other people's climate mitigation efforts. So in the experimental literature, you have your privately provided public goods, and this is how it's usually discussed in the literature. So you have 4 individuals, for example, A, B, C, D, and they decide how much of their endowment they'd like to contribute to a public pool, and the combined total of their contributions creates this public good X that they benefit from. And the benefits are usually, like in the standard literature, homogeneous across individuals. Now, what we want to do in this paper is basically look at the case when the returns to the public good or to the provisions in the public pool are heterogeneous. You have 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5, but not just that. There's this special individual D, who has marginal per capita returns of greater than 1. So this individual does not have an incentive to free ride on other people's contributions. So the Nash equilibrium prediction of this individual is perfectly aligned with the social optimum of full contribution. And then we look at what happens. So here they're contributing to a public good, which is, let's say, climate mitigation. Well, what if they're contributing to a public bad? So they make private investments, and that investments that they make privately have a negative externality, let's say climate change. So how will the behavior of individuals A, B, and C be affected by the fact that this individual D is affected or it exists? So that's what we do through a laboratory experiment. So we investigate cooperative behavior in a privately provided public good and a public bad with the kind of return that I showed earlier. So there is a person in society that is vulnerable or highly dependent to the contributions of other people to the public pool. And on top of that, we examine whether information about this heterogeneity actually affects individual behavior. And if a social nudge that asks individuals to help this particular vulnerable person D, increases cooperative behavior. So given our setup, we run an experiment and we ask the following research questions. So do high public good contributions imply low public bad contributions? When a person in the economy has public good returns of 100% or more from theirs and others' contributions, will there be full contributions from this person as theoretically predicted? Does the existence of this person influence others' contributions? And how will information nudging others to help this person affect others' behavior? So we run a standard public goods game. And then our public bads game is basically, it looks equivalent to the public goods game, but it's a totally different game. So here you have a public bad, which produces a negative externality. Individuals' decision to make investments are to an investment to a private pool, which has returns of delta greater than 1. So individuals have an incentive to make investments to this private pool that produces a negative externality. The parameters that we've chosen are standard in the literature, at least for the public goods. You have endowment equal to 20, N is equal to 4, and we make delta equal to 2. It's just the next whole number after 1. And so we have the baseline case where all the betas are 0.4, and we have 3 different kinds of treatments that I will discuss in the next slide with the MPCRs that I showed earlier. All right, so for the public goods game, the Nash equilibrium would be for anyone with a beta less than 1 would be to not contribute anything. which is the opposite of what the social optimum is. But for this beta equal to 1.2, the Nash equilibrium is in line with the social optimum. For the public bads game, it's the opposite. So the Nash equilibrium is to contribute everything, while the social optimum is not to contribute anything. And again, for beta equal 1.2, the Nash equilibrium is aligned with the social optimum. Okay, so here are our treatments. So we play both a public good and a public bad. If there's information about beta, it's homogeneous without nudge. That's a public good, a baseline public good, and a baseline public bad. If there's information about beta, betas are heterogeneous, and there's no nudge. We call it the diverse info public goods and diverse info public bads. So in the instructions, individuals are given this information. So first, they're shown this distribution, and then they're told after being shown this that they are person, let's say you're person B. So your MPCR is 0.4. If there is no information about beta, betas are heterogeneous and there's no nudge. Instead of being shown the distribution, participants are instead told that the computer screen will display the period number and the value of beta assigned to you. So in period 1, for example, they are told that they are person A and hence their beta is 0.3. But they don't know what the beta is for all other group members. And lastly, if there's information about beta I, it's heterogeneous and there's nudge. We have the nudge public goods and the nudge public bads. And it's exactly the same as the diverse info treatment, except that on top of being shown the distribution, they are told this statement. So the total group payoff is highest when everyone contributes all their tokens to the public pool. Person D will especially benefit from your contribution. Help person D contribute to the pool. All right. So we run our experiments for 20 rounds, composed of part 1 and part 2. So in part 1, we run, for example, a baseline public goods. Part 2, we run a baseline public bads. We also reverse the order to be able to control for order effects. So when we compare public goods and public bads, we do it using a within subjects design. And when we're comparing across baseline, diverse info, diverse no info, and nudge, we do it using a between subjects design. So our experiments were conducted in July of 2020, online using O3. Oops. So sensitive. The experiment ran for approximately 90 minutes and each participant got around $25 US. We had 472 participants and 118 independent groups in total. All right, so the results are as follows. So first we compare our public goods and our public bads. So remember, these are two different games. So to be able to compare them, we normalize. And so on your vertical axis, you have the percentage of total welfare. So the group payoff divided by the optimum payoff. And you can see that for all treatments, baseline, diverse info, diverse no info, and nudge, the public goods, which is the black one, is always higher or closer to the optimum payoff, group optimum payoff, than the public bads. And these are statistically significantly different using a sign rank test. Okay, now we look at the treatment effects. So on your left graph are for public goods, and on the right one is for public bads. It is measuring average group contributions on your vertical axis. So 4 individuals times 20 endowments. The social optimum for public goods would be a contribution of 80, and the social optimum for public bads would be a contribution of 0. And you can see immediately that the nudge treatment is the one that's making much of the difference. So it's the highest or the closest to the social optimum for public goods, and it's the lowest, so the closest to social optimum as well in terms of public bads. Baseline in the public goods game, baseline, diverse no info, and diverse info. Visually here, does not seem to be any difference between the cooperative behavior or the contributions of individuals in these 3 treatments. So it seems like heterogeneity in marginal per capita returns, or the information that such a heterogeneity exists, does not make a difference in the public goods game. It does make a difference in the public bads game. This is your baseline line, and your diverse info and diverse no info treatments are below that, so they're more cooperative. But between these two lines, the red and green, there does not seem to be any difference. So these are the non-parametric tests, basically to support the visual results that we showed earlier. And you can see here, nudge is making a difference for the public bads game. Diverse info and diverse no info are more cooperative, so lower contributions. But for the public bads game, you don't see any difference between diverse info and diverse no info. Same for the public goods game. And regression results support the non-parametric tests that I've shown earlier. So lastly, we'll look at the effect of heterogeneity. So we have here marginal per capita return for diverse info, diverse no info, and the nudge treatment. So a couple of things to note is that those with marginal per capita returns of 1.2, they are contributing more as expected. But the theoretical prediction for these individuals is full contribution, because they really don't have an incentive to not fully contribute. And you can see that whatever treatment they're in, they're not fully contributing. And that is just, that's kind of weird. The other marginal per capita returns, in terms of diverse info, they seem to be contributing lower than baseline. For the diverse info treatment, there does not seem to be any difference for the diverse no info treatment. But for the nudge treatment, it seems like nudge is working for this person here, which is the individual with the marginal per capita return of 0.5. So that's for the public goods. This is for the public bads, and you see similar results for those with MPCRs of 1.2. More cooperative, but not as cooperative as we have theoretically predicted they should be. And then there does not seem to be a difference between the behavior of all other marginal per capita returns compared to our baseline for diverse info, diverse no info. For nudge, they are all other MPCRs seem to be more cooperative than our baseline for the nudge treatment. And so here are non-parametric tests, and we can see that the nudge works for MPCRs of 0.5 and 1.2, but of course, 1.2 is always performing better than any other individual in the group, so they're more cooperative. The nudge works that's for the public goods, and for the public bads, the nudge seems to work for everyone. So nudging is making everyone in the group more cooperative for the public bads game. And so that's basically it. So individuals, what we found, are more cooperative in the public goods game than in the public bads game. So our games are not economically equivalent, but maybe framing has an important role to play, and that's why they're more cooperative when they're contributing to something, as opposed to when they're stopping themselves from contributing to something bad. Also, action produces a tangible result. So it might be easier for individuals to think, and this is why we see a difference. Might be easier for them to think of like a goal and them achieving something, as opposed to stopping themselves and staying at the status quo. Good action creates warm glow. There's a lot of experimental literature that shows that. And so basically when you're providing for a public good, that makes you feel better about yourselves compared to when you're trying to stop yourself from providing a public bad. We also find that vulnerable individuals are not fully cooperative. And we've wondered why this is the case. Is there something with the profit function that does not account for, that the profit function does not account for behaviorally, that maybe we should include, like why are they behaving this way? Is it because they need more time to learn? I mean, they've played the game 10 times for each game, and we don't see them fully cooperating, so we don't know what's happening. Or is it reciprocity? Are they trying to punish their other group members for not fully contributing? So even though full contribution is good for them, they're not doing it because they're trying to punish other people as well. And lastly, we find that nudge increases cooperation, which is a good news. That means that people respond to pleas for help. And the thing with our nudge treatment is that it specifically targets a particular person. We tell them, help person B. We don't tell them, help the world, help your society, help your group members, or like make your group earn more. So we specifically target them to help. We specifically told them to help a particular person. And this is similar to the next slide, which is basically like what UNICEF is doing with Sponsor a Child. So donors are given a chance to get to know the individual child that they're helping in the communities that, where the organization is working, and they provide feedback regarding where the donated money went. And this is shown to be effective in increasing donations, but also in keeping donors. And we think that one of the reasons why our nudge treatment worked, especially in the public goods game, was because it specifically targeted an individual that needed a lot of help, which is person B, which suffers the most through the provision of others' provision of the public bad. It would be interesting to look at in the future what would happen if instead of targeting person B, we just ask them to help the group earn more money. Would that make a difference in their behavior? We don't know. But that's it. Thank you very much. And that's it.
Should I share my screen now? Okay. So thank you very much for this great presentation, Anna. To sum up, this paper looks at how asymmetric returns to either the public good pool or the public bad pool affects cooperative behavior using a standard public goods game and an equivalent public bads game in the laboratory experiment. And I had a few questions that came up while reading your very interesting paper. The first question that arises was, who were the 460 participants? What did the sample look like? I think you showed it in a short slide. And then the second question is, in everyday life, people often have higher costs due to, for example, the purchase of organic products. And in the experiment, they only have lower incomes. How can this be justified? And another question would be, does the type of public good or public bad have an influence on the willingness of the participants to donate? And the last question would be, to what extent can the results from the online experiment be transferred to everyday situations?
Thank you for your comment, Julia. Can you keep the slides up so I know what to respond to? Thank you. So who were the 460 participants? We got our participants from an experimental lab database from the University of Guelph, so these are mostly Canadian students. But because we created a database during the pandemic, we basically reached out beyond the University of Guelph. And so we had a couple of Americans as well. But a huge percentage, 70–80% of our sample are Canadians, Canadian undergraduate students. I'm not sure. So in the second point, so what the difference is across individuals is in their returns to the public good or to the public bad. So we kept their income exactly the same. So they have the same endowments. They also have the same cost to contributing to the public good or to the public bad, which is one, what they lose from giving the money to the public pool. So I guess it would be interesting in the future to check what would change in terms of their cooperative contributions to the public pool if they had different endowments as well and different costs, as you said in this point. I could imagine developing countries, for example, when you think of climate mitigation efforts, they'd want to mitigate climate change, but then they might not have enough money to actually do that. So then it would be costlier for them to do mitigation. And so that might lead them to free ride on other people's contributions. So that would be an interesting thing to do in the future. Thank you for your comment. This type of public good have an influence? Yes, definitely. I mean, the example that I gave on climate change, like basically let's take, for example, Pacific Islanders. The archipelago of Tuvalu is sinking. So 2 out of their 9 islands are sinking due to rising sea levels due to climate change. And so if they were to contribute to climate mitigation efforts that would stop rising sea levels, then I'm sure, or more or less sure, I'm not them, that they would really want to contribute to that. They might not have an incentive to free ride on other people's efforts just because they're directly affected by that. But if you live on higher ground, for example, even though you suffer other consequences from climate change, that rising sea levels might not be your direct concern. So you might not be you might not feel the impact, and so you might not have that incentive to contribute so much to stopping rising sea levels. So yes, definitely the type of public good or public bad has an influence. To what extent can the results from the online experiment? So the thing with the online experiment is that, number one, your third point, it isn't for a specific public good or public bad. So it's in a neutral language, and we're really trying to get into the bottom of, would different marginal per capita returns to public polls differ in how individuals behave or not. Making it a specific public good or making it a specific public bad would add an additional level on how that particular public good affects that person in reality, which might confound our results when you're really just looking at how much the public good return or the public bad return is. I would be very careful in translating results from online experiments to specific everyday situation, but I guess what can be taken from this experiment is that, when you look at it in general from a neutral framing, this is how people behave, and it's not what has been theoretically predicted that they would behave in the case of individuals with marginal per capita returns of 1.2.
Okay, thank you very much for your great answers.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions. Maybe we start with Philip Hendel.
Hey. Yeah, thanks for the interesting talk. Actually, I have a question of understanding. I think I didn't get it correctly, maybe with the no information treatment. So they get no information about their MPCR, or because I was wondering that participants with the MPCR of 1.2 still invested more in the public good if they were in this no information treatment. So I might got it wrong. What this no information treatment is. Maybe you could shortly explain why they invest more in this no information treatment with the MPCR of 1.2 than all others, because I would expect that they invest the same as I understood it, that they don't know in which MPCR group they are.
Yeah, so they knew what their own MPCR is, but they don't know whether their MPCRs differ from the other people in the group, and they don't know what the distribution of, if it differed, what the distribution of MPCRs are. So the no information part is their knowledge of other people's MPCRs.
Okay, nice, thank you. And then I had a question on this, because I mean, it is of course interesting that participants with an MPCR of 1.2 do not invest all in the public good. And therefore I wanted to ask whether you saw that there are some kind of different groups. So there might be a group where participants invest all and a group where they invest half. Is there a possibility, or is there a grouping visible? So based on different kind of characteristics?
That's actually very interesting. We haven't taken a look at, we haven't considered dividing those with MPCRs into those with full contributions and those without full contributions. That would be something that would be interesting to look at soon after this conversation. But what we did see was that most of the time, like let's say 70% of the time, they would not give fully. So the average is actually pretty, so the mean that I showed in the graph earlier is representative of what almost everyone is doing for those with MPCRs of 1.2.
Thank you.
We would still have time to take another question. Any more questions? Maybe we give the audience a second, and maybe Julia, you want to already start sharing your screen and we can see whether someone still wants to ask something. Okay, any question did pop up? Last call, last questions for Anna? Maybe just unmute yourself, we are not that many. Okay, that doesn't seem to be the case. So, yes, perfect.
Definitely. I mean, we did use weird samples. So they're Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic individuals. It would be interesting to actually have this experiment run in developing and developed countries at the same time, see how they would interact given this kind of scenario. That would be something that would be interesting to do in the future. But yes, definitely. That's a good point that you raised.
Okay, Julia, I think then you can take over.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Julia Hopper. I'm working as a PhD student at the Paderborn University, and together with my colleagues Christine Hauptmann and Niklas Ziemann, I worked on the paper Faster, Harder, Greener, Empirical Evidence on the Role of the Individual Pace of Life for Productivity and Pro-Environmental Behavior. Now we'll come to the motivation of this study. One aspect for our motivation is the current speed-up society, which is characterized by social acceleration through globalization and digitalization, which is beneficial when it comes to economic prosperity. However, faster living was also unfavorable implications, since it goes along with social alienation and as well the devaluation of the human environment. For example, no time is taken to live consciously and sustainably, to grow their own food, or even to prepare a balanced meal. These aspects suggest that a faster living might be associated with an increase in environmental problems. In this context, research should aim to understand whether poor pro-environmental behavior is grounded in an increased pace of life and thus a symptom of the speed-up society. In the next step, I will explain how pace of life is defined. Pace of life is generally defined as the rate, speed, and relative rapidity or density of experiences, meanings, perceptions, and activities, and is according to Levine and Lorenzaya measured through walking speed, working speed, and clock accuracy. I will go deeper into these three measures later. So the pace of life is an established approach in evolutionary biology that explains differences within and between species in the exposure to time and behavior of animals. Furthermore, economists report remarkable differences in the pace of life between cities and countries, and the aggregate level showing that a collective faster pace of life in a society is associated with more economic prosperity on the macro level. This claim can be supported by the fact that, for example, Western Europe shows the fastest pace of life, whereas non-industrialized countries such as those in Latin America or Asia show the slowest. One question which arises is if the concept can be applied on the micro level to help understand, for example, humans' exposure to time and aligned behavior. To the best of our knowledge, there are no studies that have focused on the role of pace of life on the micro level. Hence, our aim of this study is to establish a standardized procedure to measure an individual's pace of life and to examine whether an individual's pace of life is associated with productivity and pro-environmental behavior on the micro level. Hence, our research question is, are individuals with a faster pace of life more productive and behave simultaneously less pro-environmental? Okay, let's have a short excursion on time. According to the socio-emotional selectivity theory, individuals differ in their ability to assess time and organize different time frames and periods. And on the one hand, time can be described as subjective time, as a lived or psychological time. As such, time is processed by the individual human mind. According to the subjective time, there is further research on, for instance, time perspectives. And on the other hand, there is the objective time regarded as continuous, universal, measurable, and homogeneous. This refers to a shared representation of time, such as clock or geographical time, which is used in, for example, time budgets. One objective time example that is the pace of life approach introduced by Levine and Norensayan. For example, for the pace of life index, they examine three indicators. First, the average walking speed, which is measured over a distance of 60 feet in downtown locations in each city under consideration. Second, the working speed, which measures the time it took postal workers to complete a simple request. And third, the clock accuracy, which measures 15 public clocks in selected downtown banks. Hence, in our study, we focus on the objective time by using the pace of life approach. Okay, now I'd like to come to our research hypothesis. Regarding the pace of life and productivity, we know from previous literature that a collective faster pace of life in a society is associated with higher collective economic outcomes, such as economic prosperity. This claim can be supported by the fact that Western Europe shows the fastest pace of life, whereas non-industrialized countries such as Latin America or Asia demonstrate the slowest. However, previous literature explores whether a region's pace of life influences how much work effort founders exert when starting and running their new ventures. They argue that a region's pace of life creates normative expectations, for example, about work ethics, and these influence the time founders spend on their business. Provided that founders are embedded in a broader social system, scholars disclose that their region's faster pace of life positively affects the effort they put into their business. Although studies confirm the relation between the pace of life and economic success on the macro level, there is, to the best of our knowledge, no evidence on the micro level. Hence, we derive our following hypothesis on the role of an individual pace of life for productivity. We hypothesize that faster individual pace of life is associated with more individual productivity. Regarding pace of life and pro-environmental behavior, there is ambiguous evidence on the macro level, and on the micro level, the literature shows more consistent evidence. Levine and Norenzayan argue that individuals with a faster pace of life tend to find less or no time for social responsibilities, and Milgram supports this argument by stating that individuals who are confronted with more sensory impressions than they can handle often experience mental overload. This is often the case in modern large cities where individuals can more easily become overwhelmed. Therefore, these individuals will focus mainly on the realization of their goals and try to reach them as soon as possible, meanwhile perceiving a diminished social responsibility. Moreover, Pearson argues that an increasing pace of life as well as the associated distraction of modern life reduce people's interest in our ability to grow their own food or even to prepare a balanced meal. Moreover, scholars find that backpackers who travel with others by car have a slower pace, since traveling by car takes longer than flying. However, it enables environmental sustainability by reducing carbon emissions. And to the best of our knowledge, there is no study yet that surveys a direct link between the individual pace of life and pro-environmental behavior. Hence, we derive the following hypothesis: a faster individual pace of life is associated with less individual pro-environmental behavior. Now I'd like to come to our research design. Our experiment took place at the Potsdam University and the Laboratory for Economic Experiments. Over 11 sessions were carried out at the Plex from 12th to 14th of October 2020. We were able to include 97 observations of German students aged between 19 and 36 in our data set. During the experiment, we introduced the word encryption task with double randomization by Bendorf to measure the participants' productivity. The word task ran for 15 minutes and participants received a certain monetary revenue for each word encrypted correctly. The revenue was featured by decreasing marginal rates as the number of words correctly encoded increased. Afterwards, the participants were informed of their total private payoff and the opportunity to donate a share of their revenue to a tree planting project. The share of the total private payoff given to the tree planting project served as our proxy for pro-environmental behavior. Moreover, we measured the participants' pace of life by recording walking speed and various aspects of working speed or working time. We recorded the participants' walking time on one section on their way from the meeting room to the Plex, where they had to no reason to pause along the way. And secondly, we timed how long the participants needed to fill out the questionnaire at the end of the experiment, because questionnaires have to be completed, for example, for applications and can consequently be conceived as a common task of daily life. Okay, let's come to the distribution of the dependent variables in these figures. To test our hypothesis, we had to quantify the individual's productivity as well as their pro-environmental behavior. So productivity was measured by the net revenue obtained in the real effort task. On average, participants solved about 60 tasks correctly and achieved a revenue of about €897 on the real effort task. Pro-environmental behavior was measured by the share of the total revenue that was donated to a tree planting project, while a lot of participants did not donate at all. There were also a few who donated their entire revenue to the tree planting project, and on average, the share of total revenue donated to the tree planting project was about 10.23%. Okay, moreover, we measured the variable of interest, the individual pace of life, following the approach of Levine and Snorer and Sarian by capturing the walking time, the working time number, and the working time questionnaire. We assume that the variation in these three variables mainly reflects the variation in the unobserved latent variable individual pace of life, and use the confirmatory factor analysis to derive an individual pace of life index. We assume that the less time the participants need to complete the working task and walk a certain section, the faster their individual pace of life will be. Therefore, the result of the confirmatory factor analysis has to be multiplied by -1 to allow the interpretation that a fast pace of life is associated with faster individuals. And this figure here plots the distribution of the variable individual pace of life, whereby we find one outlier with a very slow pace of life. And moreover, or to allow a more convenient interpretation of our results, we median split the variable individual pace of life and predominantly use the resulting dummy variable individual fast pace of life in our analysis. Next to the individual pace of life, there are certainly further socio-demographic characteristics that derive productivity and pro-environmental behavior. We controlled for age, gender, income, category, personality trait, for example, the Big Five, and nature relatedness. Now I'd like to come to the results of pace of life and productivity. In this figure, we find that a fast pace of life corresponds to higher productivity. And for our multiple regression analysis, we first run ordinary least square regressions using the revenue from the real effort task as a proxy for productivity. In model 2, we include our variable of interest as a binary dummy that specifies whether a participant is characterized by a fast pace of life or a slow pace of life. Individuals with a fast pace of life received about 0.59 euro more compared to individuals with a slow pace of life. This effect is statistically highly significant, and this holds true even if we additionally control for further established personality traits by considering, for example, the Big Five inventory variables in model 3. The participants' fast pace of life correlates positive and significantly with productivity. Among the control variables, gender was associated with productivity, and women were consistently more productive than men. This relationship is significant in model 3. Now I'd like to come to the results of pace of life and pro-environmental behavior. This figure will impact that individuals with a fast pace of life donate less to the tree planting project than those with a slow pace of life, on average about 2.2% less. And for the impact of the individual fast pace of life and on pro-environmental behavior, we used a Tobit regression. Our results show that an individual's fast pace of life is consistently negative associated with pro-environmental behavior, which becomes significantly or statistically significant in model 4. Furthermore, female and older participants behave less pro-environmentally compared to male and younger participants. Statistically robust results for these relationships are disclosed in model 4 and 5. Okay, among those who have an individual's fast pace of life, women behave significantly more pro-environmentally compared to men. However, this linkage is reversed if we focus on those with an individual's slow pace of life. Now I'd like to come to the discussion and conclusion part. This paper explores the origin of a drawback of the current speed-up society, while acceleration processes such as digitalization and globalization foster economic prosperity. We are simultaneously confronted with severe environmental impacts. One source of this development on the macro level may be well grounded in a personality trait that concerns the individual relation to time, the pace of life. First, I'd like to sum up our main results. So we placed an entire new focus by shedding light on the individual pace of life. In doing so, we enriched the current literature as our study opens up the research field to the individual pace of life and its role in economic decision-making at the micro level. Thereby, we demonstrate that the faster the individual pace of life, the higher the productivity. And here we assert a robust, significant, and strong relationship. With this result at the micro level, we contribute to the previous literature that reported similar effects at the macro level. Second, we find that individuals with the fast pace of life act less pro-environmentally at the micro level. This result confirms the negative association between a faster individual pace of life and social responsibility. Moreover, we find a negative association between a fast pace of life and pro-environmental behavior only for men. This adds to the literature on gender and pro-environmental behavior. In this context, future research should focus on the reasons why women seem to act more but men less pro-environmentally if their lives speed up. Okay, our results on the individual pace of life for productivity and pro-environmental behavior mirror a development that has been observed at the macro level for years. The faster the development in a society, the greater the economic success. However, as the literature shows, faster living is not for granted. It goes along with social alienation and the devaluation of the human environment. Scholars divide the types of acceleration into four different perspectives relating to social structure, culture, personality type, and the relation to nature. And Rosa uses this approach to highlight that there are deceleratory perspectives for social structure, culture, and personality type, but that there is no complementary deceleration even with respect to nature. He only finds the possibility that environmental disaster could decelerate exogenously. This could even be another important direction for further research to focus on the dramatic increase of environmental problems in the last decades as one symptom of this high-speed development in society, especially with regard to the pace of life of individuals. Moreover, Van den Berg argue that we need international agreement. Okay, I only
wrap up.
Okay. Moreover, Van den Berg argued that we need international agreements which facilitates countries to implement regulatory policies to create incentives to adjust behavior, even though more appropriate would be a growth strategy, which shows an indifferent attitude about growth. Additionally, even the ex-ante focus on public policy about growth. Additionally, even the ex-ante focus on policy is in their eyes the right one, seen as the best strategy, which is lastly more likely to receive the necessary democratic political support. They argue that social scientists could think about systematic solutions to attain social political acceptance. In this context, our results additionally help to explain individuals' pro-environmental behavior that is strongly needed in order to understand the dynamics of the Anthropocene. Scholars also outline that voluntary pro-environmental behavior can be interpreted as a complement to or even substitute for obligatory policy measures that aim at mitigating climate change. And with this regards, our results also add to the complex discussion on the identification of climate change as an important moral imperative. Okay, so thank you for your attention.
Okay, with that we come to the discussion. Louis, you have slides, or you want to just take over?
Yes, I'll share it. Oh, everybody's can see the okay. Oh, it's an interesting paper with a contemporary and important theme. Well, while reading it, I thought that it is a fluid and organized text and holds the reader's attention. So it's also a good insight in exploring the disaggregation of the pace of life to the individual level. Also, I thought it's a challenging task to disaggregate the pace of life to the individual level. And the choice of donating to a tree planting project addresses one specific aspect of pro-environmental behavior in the individual level, which is punctual. And it does not require time of the participant directly, what may be considered fragile as pro-environmental behavior in a broad way. That is, instead of only the donation, for example, it could be offered to the participant to plant a tree himself. Or well, furthermore, how to deal with habits that require a longer time spent in relation to pro-environmental behavior. In this sense, I thought that maybe it could be interesting to check whether a faster pace of life has different associations with different pro-environmental behavior perspectives. Also, I'm sorry. I had some trouble, I'm sorry about that. I had some trouble in identifying the experiment's treatment. So what was exactly randomized there? And isn't pace of life correlated with productivity by construction? The tasks used to measure both, even if not overlapping totally, but it may require similar abilities. Could it be an issue? Pace of life versus donating to tree planting. Maybe a mean different test of pace of life between those that donate or not may be useful. Pace of life was not randomized, thus the OLS regressions do not capture its cause and effects. It may be also correlated with unobservable variables such as ability. And since observations are not many, maybe a reviewer would have doubt to consider that the results are so robust as done in the conclusion. That may be replaced by more emphasis in the novelty of results and the rigor of laboratory procedures. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much for your comments. So could you maybe point your slides so that I can read what
Just a minute.
Maybe Christine can also help me answering all the questions.
So hello everyone, I can step in if you would like to. Yes, of course, it is a very challenging task to disaggregate the pace of life to the individual level. However, the approach stems from the environmental biology literature, from the biology literature. So it is explicitly measured on the individual level, and it was a social science, so to say, who use it on the macro level first. So from the origin, it is really a concept on individuals, on species, and on the comparison between and within different type of species. So we think it could be an important impact to understand people's perception of time and how they relate their behavior and their life to time. So the choice of the donating to the tree planting project is it is really, as you said, it's really a hard question to find or to measure pro-environmental behavior. We have dealt here with this tree planting project. However, there are maybe better ways to measure it. In this context, it was helpful, but as you said, yes, it could be improved. Yes, it would be very helpful to check this. Of course, there's no doubt on this. So we will leave this for future research and do it, of course. And as you mentioned, it is not an experiment. There is no treatment. It was just an empirical study where we measured a trait, which is not a personality trait as it is defined in psychological literature. However, it is really an individual's perception to time. And this is what we measure on an individual level and relate this to behavioral aspects, which concern productivity as well as pro-environmental behavior. And no, the last question, the pace of life is not necessarily correlated with the productivity by construction, because we don't have Julia's slides here, but the tasks they were doing were really daily life tasks. So this was not working, not doing something which you are paid for, and we really have to be careful, and this was done carefully during the experimental design, that we have the part for measuring the pace of life by constructing really daily life things you are doing generally, like tipping in your bank's account or filling in any questionnaire. So this is nothing what you are paid for and what is working really. So if you do something to work, this is another thing which gives you productivity. You have an output, which is not the same for this daily life task. Between those that donate, yes, we did this, I think, with donation to tree planting. Yes, we split up the sample. I think Julia showed this with the Tobit regression. And the pace of life cannot be randomized, so you are right. And we don't speak of causal effects yet. We measure a correlation here, and we are very cautious throughout the paper to not speak of causality, because we know that we cannot. We all additionally, from knowing this from the very beginning, we measure a pace of life of a person, and this should be the pace of life we measure for this person a year later or a year before. So this is nothing we can treat, and we do not want to treat it. We just want to measure it. This was something which causes some confusion, but it is really something we just have to measure and cannot treat here. So yes, we find correlation. So
I think we are already, unfortunately, getting over time.
No problem at all.
I bet there are a lot of more questions from the audience.
No questions.
I also have a few more, so maybe we can just stick in the room later and discuss further. But then I would hand over to Louis to upload the slides.
Thank you for the great questions, Louis.
Let me share the screen. So, well, hello, everyone. This is Luis from Brazil. First of all, thank you all for watching this presentation. This paper was written by Thiago Morello, who's watching us, and me, and it's called Gardening Support for Piggyvian Taxation with Tax Return, a lab experiment. So let me start with the motivation. Theoretically, the Piggyvian tax, once introduced with the correct rate, is optimal. But in practice, carbon taxation, road pricing, and taxation of fossil fuels faces great opposition by the general public and the private sector. So, what is the way forward in taxing externalities? One option covered by literature is recycling tax revenue in a pre-informed way, what may increase acceptance. That's what previous Piggyvian tax lab experiment suggests in regards to earmarking. Studies shows that the more direct recycling in the form of tax return is also effective in increasing tax compliance, a positive attitude that may be extended to acceptance. So here it's worth reminding that Canadian carbon tax is partly returned directly to households. And nevertheless, 3 key issues were barely touched or ignored by these studies. And our contribution is to address these issues, which are: in which degree efficiency is traded for acceptance, and how different degrees of recycling perform in acceptance and efficiency grounds, and recycling under the experimental requirement that budget be balanced within groups of participants introduces an implicit tax discount, what has remained implicit in previous studies. Addressing these 3 issues is the goal of the paper. To be clearer, I'll address the objective of the paper in a broader way. For that, it should be considered that the implicit discount results into the reduction of the tax rate. So to avoid bias, we make this explicit. We are using the most direct way to recycle revenue, which is to return part of it to the own taxpayer. So our treatment here is tax return. The objective is to measure the causal effect of tax return on acceptance and efficiency. And the method we choose for that is a laboratory experiment with undergraduate students. So about the experiment structure. In the experiment, participants performed 2 operations. The first one, a quantity choice with fixed price and decreasing marginal revenue. And the second one, they had to vote in a referendum for the introduction or not of the externality tax. The externality was attached to purchases, being directly proportional to them. There was 5 participants per market. So when one participant purchased a given quantity, it generated externality to all the other 4 participants in the group or market, but not to the own participant. Here, about following with the experiment structure. In the experiment, we had 3 treatments: 0 treatment, where there was no tax return; 50% treatment, where half of the tax returned to the taxpayer; and 80% treatment, where 80% of the tax returned to the taxpayer. About the dimensions of the experiment, we had 160 participants, all of them undergraduate students of our university, divided in 16 sessions. Each session had 20 rounds with 3 stages and 2 referendum. So here we show the experiment's timeline. In the beginning of this session, participants read and listened to the presentation of instructions and responded a quiz on profit calculations. After that, the first stage of the experiment started with 10 rounds of quantity decisions. Then the first ballot occurred with vote decision. After the vote, respondents stated their planned quantities with and without tax, and the quantity they expected the average member of the group to choose with and without tax. After that, participants were informed about the voting result. And in the second stage, another 5 rounds of quantity choice occurred. Then we had a second ballot. And it's important to mention that participants were not previously informed about the second ballot. And finally, we had the 5 last rounds of quantity choice. After the last 20th round, a questionnaire was applied and the payment was made to participants. So about the hypothesis, a theoretical model basing the experiment was developed. And the main results are here in this table, which shows that how individual payoff varies with tax return. Payoff is computed in 3 ways, depending on whether damage and transfer are accounted or not. And the main implications were summarized into 2 hypotheses for the experiment. The first one, is there an acceptance effect? And the second one, is there an efficiency effect? Following to the method, 2 types of analysis of acceptance and efficiency effects were conducted. First, an unconditional analysis based on mean and proportional difference tests. And second, a conditional analysis accounting for unbalancedness of some respondents' characteristics with multivariate regression. Here we see the probit logit regression for the binary tax vote variable. Now, turning to results, we noticed that 44% of participants did not chosen the optimal quantity, and most of them made a 1 unit mistake. Also, most of participants stated planned quantities and expected that others quantities would deviate from the optimal level. This means that the rational voting assumption, the RVA, that based the theoretical model was violated. That's pretty important because it means that acceptance and efficiency effects could deviate from theoretical predictions. To check if this was the case, we'll start with results from the unconditional analysis. There was an acceptance effect for only the treatment of 50% tax return. And with 80% treatment, acceptance was below the 50% level, what was not expected by us. Regarding the efficiency effect, efficiency was larger under 50% tax return, what was not expected, as it should be the same according with the theoretical model. Now, efficiency with 80% return was smaller than with 50% return, what was expected. But 80% efficiency was also expected to be smaller compared with 0 return, what was not the case. Heading to the conditional analysis of the acceptance effect, we use the regression to account for the imperfect balance, and here stands out the results for the first ballot. There was larger acceptance in the 50% and 80% treatments when compared to the 0 treatment, and there was equivalence in comparison of the treatments 80% and 50%. Now, regarding the efficiency effect, there was greater efficiency of 50% of tax return when compared to 0, and there wasn't no efficiency effect for the 80% treatment. The 80% had smaller efficiency level when compared to the 50% level, which was expected. So these results are similar to the unconditional analysis, and therefore they refute the hypothesis of absence of efficiency effect. But nevertheless, it challenges the theoretical prediction, which we saw in the table 1, that 50% and 0 tax return are equally efficient, and that 80% return is less efficient than 0. So therefore, a summary of results based in the conditional analysis of the most reliable first ballot is that acceptance effect was positive under both 50% and 80% tax return. So this recycling form effectively increases support for Piggivian taxation. And about the efficiency effect, it was expected no efficiency effect for the 50% treatment when compared to 0, but in fact, it increased efficiency. And it was expected decreased effect for 80% treatment when compared to 50%, what occurred. This result was robust to the subsample of participants with high score in the quiz. Now we head to the discussion. The first topic of discussion is whether, even with profit deviating from rational voting assumption, the ERVA, it still adheres to the less demanding profit-based voting assumption. That is, let's abstract the fact that quantity was not optimally chosen and consider that participants chose based on stated planned quantities and expected others quantities. Based on this, two questions are here asked. The first one is, did the payoff gain of yes vote was still reasonable? And the second one is, did the actual vote follow such payoff gain? Starting with the first question on whether the payoff gain was reasonable, we have this triple graph here, which corresponds to the treatments level. And in the vertical axis, we have the profit gain from yes vote compared to no vote. And in the horizontal axis, we have the expected increase in others quantity that was stated by participants. What we see is that profit gain is negatively biased under 0 return and positively biased and in the 80% in the 80% return and roughly centered around 0 in the 50% return. That is exactly what we expected. So we can say that even if participants were not optimizing, they still behaved reasonably. And a second result that this graph shows us is that, and that was not confirmed quantitatively, is that smaller reductions in others quantities under tax were expected under 80% return, and even increases were expected. So this is visible in the larger number of black dots at the bottom left of the 80% graph as comparative to the other graphs. The second question of this first part of discussion is did actual vote follow the payoff gain? Answer was negative. As the table shows, excepting the 0 treatment, pro-vote was not dominant when it was expected to generate a profit gain. Neither it was anti-vote, vote against Piggivian taxation, when a profit loss was expected from tax introduction. Therefore, two factors caused the deviations from rational voting assumption. In summing up this first part of the discussion. First is suboptimization expectation that others would suboptimize and not basing voting on payoff gain. This is in accordance with results of previous lab experiments. And about the second part of the discussion, it is related to the strategical quantity and voting choice. So we asked whether participants deviated from rational voting assumption, the RVA, in another specific way. So that is whether quantity and voting were strategical in the sense of responding to others' choices. Starting with strategical quantity decision, the only proxy of others' quantity choice, the only proxy of others' quantity choice the participant observed was damage. Thus, we tested whether damage caused own vote. But since damage and quantity choice in general are endogenous because they were not randomly assigned as the treatment was, the instrument variable approach was applied by us. So the instrument we are using for damage is the quality that the other participants in the group stated as planned to choose quantity when they were asked after the ballot. So which is exogenous for being an information that only the experimenter observed. This is the instrument for damage in the first stage, but in the second stage, vote was regressed against exogenized damage on quantity. And as the result, damage caused on vote. So quantity choice was strategical. The second question is whether voting was strategically chosen. So to test that, we ran a multiple regression of vote change against the result of the first ballot. The basic idea here is that the first ballot worked as a poll for the second ballot, revealing vote intentions of others in the group. It resulted that the first ballot result was significant, thus indicating strategical voting. Here we cannot apply instrument variables or other quasi-experimental method, so the evidence is merely indicative. In summary, we have evidence that both quantity and vote choice were strategical. This is important because we know that when people behave strategically, we may have multiple equilibria, what makes the Pigouvian taxation unpredictable. To wrap up this presentation, finally the conclusion. This was a pioneer effort in exploring the degree of recycling and not merely the presence or absence of it as a strategy to motivate acceptance of Pigouvian taxation. For the case of 50% tax return, results adhere to theoretical equilibrium model. We had positive acceptance effect without loss of efficiency, which indicates that this way of recycling Pigouvian revenue is positive to improve acceptance. The 80% treatments results shows that despite the positive despite the positive results of 50%, tax return has limitations to address the systematic resistance witnessed, and that in this level we will have loss of efficiency. The effects that we observed that differs from theoretical predictions due to four main factors that we judge as important contribution for this paper. The first one is the mild suboptimization, what includes the fact that participants did not expect the other participants to optimize too. The second one is small perceived tax effectiveness under 80%. People may know that with a large tax return, the tax loses its potential to address externalities. So they kind of anticipate that in the referendum. And the third one was propensity of not basing voting decision on payoff. The fourth one was strategical behavior while choosing quantity and while voting. So that's it. Thank you for watching this presentation.
Thank you, Luis. I take over and try to share my screen. Let's see whether it works. You should be seeing now this. I hope that works. 1 second. So yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I think that's a very important research question that you're asking. So how this revenue use or recycling impacts the acceptance and also the efficiency of taxes. And it seems to be a question that is very timely, looking at all these discussions that we see in a lot of countries now to introduce a CO2 tax and also the resistance that comes with it. You worked at the laboratory experiment, building on previous experimental work that you outline nicely in the paper, and you focus exactly on this tension between acceptance and efficiency. And I find that finding that you have that not the highest tax return leads to the highest acceptance quite interesting. I have a few comments. I thought we focus in the discussion just really on this higher level comments, or maybe rather discussion questions. So one question, when I was reading the paper, you talk about acceptance, and acceptance in your experiment is measured as a pro-tax voting. And if I now make the link to the real world, that is a rather active choice that you do there for that tax rate, while in the real world we rather accept the taxes that are introduced by not protesting, right? So it's more passive choice. So I would find interesting what you think, how that shapes your results, that you need to do this active, proactive choice of voting. Then one aspect that I realized in your model, and that might be also due to other papers, I'm not sure, that the own purchase that you do does not contribute to the overall damage. So also here I was wondering, what is the reasoning that this is taken out, and also how would that change your predictions if own decisions would also lead to self-inflicted harm? And lastly, and I think you discussed it a bit at the end, also in the paper, how do you judge the internal and external validity of your results? That's a rather standard question, but I think it's still relevant in your case, since you discuss yourself that the subject's understanding of the game and the dynamics might be limited, and also what the others do. So I was wondering, okay, so if we then make again the link to the real world, does that belittle your external validity, or do you think actually that's also the case in the real world, that a lot of people don't fully understand the mechanisms? So yeah, these are the three questions. Everything else I send you by email afterwards. And yes, just you have time, so if you want to answer all of them, then we still have time for questions afterwards.
Okay, well, I'll invite Thiago to the discussion here.
We have I think we have time for taking one question from the audience. So maybe someone wants to step up.
Yeah, may I can ask a question, but first, thanks for the presentation. And I'm a huge fan for experiments that are somehow related to voting and stuff like this. So, and therefore I have two papers came to my mind, and I haven't looked at your manuscript, so sorry for that, and I'm not sure if you already covered them. But let me bring them up. The first is this paper by Luca Balafutas on equality, equity, and incentives. And here participants, they play a public good game, and basically participant can choose about how to recycle the benefits from the public good. So how they are distributed among in the group. So I don't know. I think that could be maybe of interest for you. And the next one, that is always, I said I'm a huge fan of everything that covers voting, but it's also always tricky, because then it depends on what you can compare, because you run in a lot of selection and self-selection issues. And therefore, I was not sure how you can, if this could be problematic in your case, if you, and therefore, basically I have to look at your manuscript, because I was not sure how this voting was implemented exactly, and then what participants could what you can compare afterwards. So if you can compare the different schemes. Yeah, I put it in the chat, the references. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, then I'm sneakily taking over. Yeah, okay. So I'm presenting work on communication and social dilemmas today with which is co-work with my dear colleagues in Osnabrück, which is Juan Felipe Ortiz Riomalo, who is in the audience. I cannot see you. Ah, yeah, he's here. Yeah, and Matthias Janke and Stephanie Engel. And I do big picture, and then I do a small picture of what we do. So big picture, and I guess most of you know that we have a lot of social dilemma situations in our daily life. We can think about biodiversity conservation, climate change, implementation of just general environmental protection actions. And cooperation and coordination are highlighted as a necessary prerequisite for overcoming these dilemmas. We need to give up something from our own benefit to contribute to the common good. And another insight that you probably are aware of from a long stream of literature is that communication has a substantial positive effect on cooperation. Yeah, so cooperation really can be increased if there's a possibility to communicate. And this study that I'm presenting today will delve here into that. And it's motivated by a research stream that we do together on participation. And we see a lot of interlinkages there between participation and communication. And particularly in environmental governance, there is a big call and political demand for participation. Here's the 92 Rio Declaration. Yeah, environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens at relevant level. So just that as a background, I will focus now again on communication, but I will make these links to participation again through the talk. Okay, so what do we do? Small picture now. So we reviewed existing studies that have analyzed chat protocols in public good games, where the participants could communicate through a chat before they played. And we saw what did those studies find when they coded this chat text afterwards, what did they identify as the important element? So we synthesized all of that literature that we found and said, okay, what elements did those studies identify as the important elements in communication that triggers cooperation afterwards? And then we went and said, okay, can we design interventions that actually resemble these elements of the free communication that we saw before that induced cooperation? And why are we interested in these structured interventions? Well, because we believe that these are similar to interventions that are also used in these participatory approaches that I mentioned before. So we designed interventions and then we went to the lab and tested them and tested what is the effect of those interventions in a public good experiment. And then made a step again and contrasted the effects that we find for the single interventions in comparison to a setting where there's no communication, not that interesting, but also to a setting where there's free communication, where people again can only chat. So why do we do that? Well, we believe that understanding that which elements are important in communication can help to find ways how to incorporate them, to structure them. And this then can give control what information is shared and with whom. And exactly this structured control we think is important because it may benefit in a lot of settings, particularly in those settings when there are a lot of stakeholders, when they are very diverse, when maybe not everyone feels comfortable in speaking up due to power imbalances, where it is complicated in coming together and talking to each other, yeah? Logistically difficult, time-consuming, inefficient, and so on. And we hope that out of this analysis, we can inform which are those elements, how can you structure them, and then also how can we implement them in practice, and what is the effect on cooperation. So our contribution to the literature, to the existing literature, is that we don't look at different forms of communication and see which ones are more effective. Yeah, that has been done. Free, as a face-to-face versus computer-mediated communication and all of that. We also don't look on why communication is so effective. Yeah, also there are different theories. Some say there is just coordination, belief change. Others say it induces a group identity and so on. Now, we really are interested in what kind of information needs to be shared that cooperation is increased afterwards. So I said that first part of the study is just the synthesis of existing insights. And for that, we looked at these different social dilemma experiments where they had free-form communication, and they identified the following elements as important. One was that participants talked about the problem that they are facing, so yeah, the dilemma that they have. Then participants in the chat defined different strategy how to deal with this problem, and also explored sometimes through calculations what the consequences would be of the single strategies. Then third, they tried to find an agreement. So the participant made a proposal and others said, yes, okay. Yeah, they tried to see what do we as a group want, and then I tried also to agree on that. And then also they ratified this decision, yeah, promised that they would stick to that strategy. And that has been done usually in exactly that order. So that's the synthesis of the studies that we reviewed. And now we move to the experiment that we did. So we are working here. The working horse is a public good game, as I said already, and a two-stage design. So we have 10 rounds of the public good game in the first stage here. Then we have some kind of interventions that I will explain in a second. And then we have another 10 rounds of a public good game that the group plays in exactly the same matching group. So this is all standard. And now I show you the interventions. So these are the different treatment groups. So the two controls that I mentioned already is one with no communication at all, and one with free communication, where they, again, like the studies before, had an open text chat with 10 minutes. And here, those are the interventions that have these structured elements. So one, we have a structured intervention about problem awareness. I will show them in a second. We have one structured intervention about just talking about different strategies, learning about the strategies and the consequences. Then we have here an element that combines not only talking about strategies or learning about strategies, but also an agreement phase. Here we also work with a voting mechanism for those who are big fans of voting. And then we have here two combined sets where we here have more or less exactly what we had before, but we have before the problem awareness. So we make them first aware of the problem. And then in the full set, we combine also with the ratification, so with this promise at the end. So this is just then adding all these structured interventions after each other, so that we have the same line as we saw them before. I talk you quickly now through the interventions, because I think since we talk about interventions, this is important that you see that, how that was implemented. So the first one would be problem awareness. So here we depicted it first, the previous development of the group over the 10 rounds in the first stage. So how did they develop? And then also we provided them with an explanation on why we usually see this decrease in contribution levels in public good games. This is oriented on France et al. That did a similar treatment there. So that was really to understand what the dilemma is, but also to understand what conditional cooperation means and why it leads to the decreasing or deterioration of contributions. Then the next intervention was the strategy element. So here we named 3 different strategies. One would be that everyone contributes everything, so the entire endowment, which would be the social optimal strategy. The other strategy was that everyone does whatever they want to do. And then the third strategy is that no one contributes anything, so the individual dominant strategy. Here, this is now ABC, but the numbering was randomized. So yeah, there's no order effect here. And also individuals could explore after seeing this strategy what that would mean. So they could click at different scenarios and then see what their payoffs would be and what payoffs of the others would be in the total group payoffs, and also how that would develop over time. So this was really targeted in increasing an understanding of the actions. Then I said there in the next treatment, it was combined. So this was really targeted at coordination. And here then the players could vote which strategy they preferred. And we had here several rounds. So that was first round. And if they didn't decide all for the same strategy, they had the chance to re-vote again. So they were nudged a bit, trying to coordinate on this social optimal strategy. Okay, and then the last one was that once they found an agreement on a common strategy that was decided by majority vote, they could also decide to ratify that social optimal strategy. Okay, and with that, I just maybe checking in whether someone has an urgent question on the design. Okay, then I continue with the results. First, I show you the average results comparing stage 1 and stage 2 contributions. And it is almost a bit too clean to be true. So these are the differences in group contributions in the different treatment groups. So here we see no communication. So that means those groups in the no communication treatment contributed less on average in the second stage. That's also not surprising. That has been shown in the literature before. And the free communication contributed the most. And then we see a continuous increase in this additional increase in contributions depending on our treatments. The biggest jump actually we see if we compare that, we see here. So this is the strategy and agreement treatment that targeted the coordination in the group. I will come back to that point. Of course, we also have a regression analysis, and I don't want to focus too much on that because I find it's difficult to see that in talks, but just this is a Tobit model on group contributions now, and group contributions in the second stage, controlling for the group contributions in the first stage. And you see already what I just showed is that if we now look at the average group contributions, not taking the dynamic into account yet, is that there is no significant increase for this problem awareness and for the strategy treatment. And then it makes this big jump once there is the coordination. And then if we add the problem awareness, and here it's problem awareness and ratification, it increases further. I think that's best seen now if we look at just the plotted contribution level over time, which would be then model B and model C corresponding to it. So I talk you through here, but of course all the regressions are also in the paper. So here, this is baseline, this is control. So typical standard progress of public good games, so it's decreasing. Then after this new stage starts, it has a bit this restart effect, also that has been shown previously in the literature, and then it's decreasing again. So now we add here the strategy and the problem awareness. What I just showed you led not to a significant increase if we go over all rounds. It has a significant small significant increase if we just look at this first jump after the treatment. And we have here then this coordination treatment that has this first significant boost in cooperation. Okay, then we add to that now to the coordination, the ones where we had the problem awareness before. And again, we see a jump. So if the groups were sensitized to the problem beforehand, actually the contributions increased further if they had the element of this coordination. So we can say that the coordination is the most important element, but if there was a problem awareness beforehand, then we could even have a stronger increase. And lastly, we see that this is not a free communication, it's very high. We get close with our combined chain of interventions to the free communication. And I will discuss that in a second in the literature again. What was different, since this is the highest, what was different in this free communication? Well, here people could just chat, right? So we identified certain elements, but obviously there was still small talk and messages aimed at social bonding. So this is something that we have not captured so far. And we actually went and recoded now these messages in the free communication again with an ex post technique. And we see that if we look at those messages and if we resemble the interventions that we have conducted in our experiment, we see they are there, 4% of the messages were about problem awareness, 19% were about the strategies, 19% were about coordination. But we also see a lot of the messages that they exchanged were about social bonding, which included smileys, wishings, whooping, greetings, small talk that was conducted before in the winter semester about Christmas, about the weather, also how much time is still left, and what the lab assistants do and things like that. So there was some just chatter around. So I would like to discuss that a bit further, but let me first go in a nutshell, bring it together. So what are the results? So first result one is that structured interventions mimicking the elements of effective communication, which we have previously identified in free communication, lead to a significant increase in cooperation if, and that's important, if the groups are given a possibility to coordinate on a common optimal strategy.
And Catherine, sorry, 3 minutes.
Thanks. Second result, the combined sequence with all interventions leads to a stronger increase in cooperation than the interventions facilitating agreement on a common strategy. So we need agreement, but then if we add this problem awareness to it, it gets stronger. And third, cooperation levels in our structured communication treatment get close to the cooperation observed in the free-form communication treatment. And I think that's an interesting result, and I would like to discuss that or put that a bit more into perspective. So, because in our setting, yes, the free communication in some regressions, I also need to say that, is stronger and more significant if there is free communication than our chain. But first of all, that result is not robust in all regressions. So, for example, if we exclude the end rounds, this is not the case. But also, I think it is a bit a result of the lab. Yeah, we had a very simple dilemma. Groups were small, actors were identical, communication was easy and anonymous. While if we go back to where we came from, where we got motivated in the real world, this is often not the case. Actors are very heterogeneous. They are a lot, numerous. Not everyone feels comfortable in speaking up. We have power imbalances. We have prejudices. And we believe that the fact that we saw that we got close to the potential of free communication, this might be even becoming stronger if we implement it in the field, where actually then we can first of all control what information is shared, and we can do it in an efficient manner and maybe even enable. So here there might be actually the disadvantage of the structured communication elements might even become stronger. And with that, I'm at the end. So yeah, thank you.
So it's my turn to discuss. Let me share my screen. So thank you, Anne-Catherine, for that very clear and very interesting presentation. I've always been interested in what kind of information is shared when individuals are communicating that leads to increases in cooperation. So I think that your paper and research question is really very interesting and very informative and really contributes to the literature. I also very much enjoyed reading your paper. I have three mostly like discussions to facilitate future discussions on your paper. The first is on social chit-chat, which is what you discussed last. So you mentioned at the start of your presentation that there were 3 reasons in the literature why communication works: and facilitating cooperation, so facilitating cooperative social norms, group identity, and it helps coordination. And then you find that free-form communication actually leads to higher contributions than your full set of treatments. And I was wondering if it was right to conclude that it is because social chit-chat actually increases group identity. And if that's the case, I was wondering if there was a way that you can think of doing a treatment in the future where it is just social chit-chat without problem awareness, without talking about strategies or agreement or ratification. And if by itself, chit chat can lead to an increase in cooperation. It might also be interesting to look at existing studies when, like, if they've made their communication data set available to see like what they find with social chit chat. And I'm wondering if group identity is more solidified or the effects would be stronger if it was like a face-to-face communication rather than an online communication. The second point is on the voting. So if I understand correctly, you had 2 voting stages. So they vote, and if they agree unanimously for the social optimal, then they move on to play the game. Otherwise, they vote again. I was wondering if there was a reason why the unanimity is only for the social optimum. What happens if they unanimously agree to be uncooperative? So, like, did that case even occur? And like, how did that change behavior in the future rounds? And the last point is on the advice. So there's literature in the public goods that says individuals are more responsive or more cooperative when advice is endogenously given as opposed to exogenously given by someone. So under the problem awareness treatment, advice was given by the experimenter. Do you think that the behavior would change, or maybe you'd see a higher increase in cooperative behavior if the advice was given by a peer instead of the experimenter? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Very good questions. I will start with 2 and 3, and then I want to involve Juan Felipe because we had a lot of discussion about that one. So maybe I start with 3. So yes, actually that has been shown. So if the advice comes from peers, there is an effect. So if it is from the, that's this Brand's paper, and I think there are also follow-up papers on that. So it makes a difference whether it comes from the experimenter rather than from a peer, and it is more effective when it comes from a peer. Why did we choose that with a social optimum? Yes, so this is a nudge to be transparent here. So yes, because we really want, I mean, what is the aim of that? The aim is really that we want to coordinate on the social optimum. So if they would have agreed uniformly that they all want to incorporate the decision to not cooperate, that would have been fine, but we nudged them into this social optimum. And actually there was no group where that was the case, where they all said we want to not cooperate. So that was also not the case. But yes, the design also with this reiteration that you had the chance again to vote after you learned that how your group decided. By the institutional design, we nudged the groups into getting into that direction. And then with the social chit-chat and whether that facilitates group identity. Yeah, so it's one of the reasons why, so there are different, I would say there are different streams in the literature that argue why they believe this communication has such a strong effect. And there are definitely scholars who say it's the group identity. It's, if we subtract everything, as you said, and we just force them to talk about the weather, then this still has an effect. And I think there are, if we think about this in-group and out-group experiments, I mean, there is evidence that makes, has an impact. Juan Felipe, I would like to take you in and give you also the chance to respond to that, because we had, I think we also have a bit different views on that point, what the social chit-chat does.
Yeah, indeed, but related to that previous question, to the second question, which you tackled first, somehow is related to our kind of the practical interest of the study, no? Which, as the title indicates, we were interested in analyzing somehow also what happens in those kinds of processes where an external actor is really interested in structuring communication processes in a way that it really fosters cooperation, no? Somehow, and based on that, at the beginning, we decided to try to design in this way the consensus building mechanism, because in the end, these processes are aimed, as Catherine said, to foster cooperation and to promote this kind of consensus. But I agree with you, Anna, that in the end, it's also interesting to see how these results could change if the decision rule is also modified a bit, no? And also the insights that the social chit chat provides somehow is that these kind of processes are also about of networking, no? Of social interaction, no? It's not only about exchanging meaningful information regarding the collective action problem at stake, but also of letting people to have human exchanges about apparently trivial things, no? So, and that's what happens usually also in these processes. It's not also the technical information that is provided and the kind of agreements that are facilitated, but it's also about letting the relevant actors to exchange, to meet themselves and to have some sort of interaction. And what that suggests is it's an interaction about it's about the coffee chat somehow, no? Not only what's happening within the formal session, but what's happening in the coffee that could bring either this social identity you referred to, but also perhaps that could give input for trust building, no? That's the way for people to reassure that the others are trust worthy. So I think that's perhaps kind of the practical implication we could draw from that, you know, and reflection that I would add to what Catherine was saying.
I think Carlo has a question. We are over time, Carlo, but ask it and then I just start, and when people want to, want to leave, they leave.
Yeah. Thanks for this paper. I guess I think that's a great kind of a decomposition analysis. So having this overall effect and then just cutting it in pieces, and then of course it's very interesting to think about this residual. So what this fact that you cannot explain with your treatment. So the difference between the full set on interventions and then the free communication. But the other way of thinking about this is how big is this. Not what is this residual, but how large is it actually? Because what you assume now is that all these components are perfectly additive separated. You simply sum up the different components. And I was wondering if there is, I guess, 1 million of structures could be possible, but if there is some kind of theory that should give you, okay, that some things are supplements, some things are complements, some things just, you know what I mean? Or if there is some technical exercise where you can try to combine these parameters in different ways that are coming closer to what's the overall effect of a free communication is.
Yes, I mean, we don't, we thought actually about that. We don't have all elements individually because some of them made, in our opinion, no sense, right? So, for example, the agreement to allow for a single agreement without presenting any strategies doesn't make sense. And the same with the promise. The promise you could do maybe allow a little ratification. So we did that a bit, I think, I don't fully recall it, but we tried to do it for those that we have, so for the problem awareness and the strategies. But yeah, I don't want to open out the slides again, but I think it gets close to just being additive. But of course, for the others, we don't know, right?
Because that's an important assumption in this kind of decomposition. So analysis, how do these things relate to each other?
Yes.
So I guess that's...
But for example, just to comment on that, and I think you're right that it is not purely additive. So for example, we saw that if we added the problem awareness, that had an additional effect. But the ratification, so, and I have done studies on the promises, that didn't lead to an additional increase, right? So probably there was already so much in this coordination that actually is part of this promise making that this didn't then, that the moral commitment alone did not lead to an additional increase there. So yes, you're right, you cannot even disentangle that even a bit more and see what is doable there. Yes.
Yeah, and in terms of this, what is left, though, and this group feeling, and so I think there are tons of experiments who use this minimal group paradigm stuff or something like that to create some sort of identity and see if this could explain what is left so far.
Maybe just to comment. For me, that interesting thing is I think with that having these structured mechanisms and these controls, or having a facilitator, as Juan Felipe before said, is that, you know, group identity and the social chit chat, I mean, doesn't necessarily only need to lead to positive results, right? So, and I think that's what we try also to make I totally believe that there is something that is just about bonding and group identity, but it can also backfire. And I thought it was a nice result to see that we actually, that there is not that much, that at least in our experiment, that is left.
Of course, I guess that also communication can fail dramatically, and then there are these experiments on here and what. But if one bad apple influences the whole everything, yes. I don't know. So that.
We are losing people. I think let's come to an end. Thanks a lot for the last ones who are still standing. I think everyone. Let's do an official closure, and everyone who's still interested can just stay in the room and we can continue discussing. But yeah, but Nadia, at least if she wants to leave, she can leave.
So, okay. So will you close the session officially, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I had still things to say to Julia, but she left already. I thought there were some things that were interesting to discuss, but she's not there anymore.
Then I'll assign you as host, and maybe I will leave the session. Will that be okay?
Yes. No, you deserved your weekend, definitely, after that stressful conference week.
All right, then. Have a nice discussion, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
I have to go as well, but thank you, Aunt Catherine, for facilitating this entire seminar, and then good to meet everyone online. Bye.
Nice meeting you, Anna. Ciao. Tiago and Luis, I will send you my comments. Just see what you make out of them. If you have questions, feel free to get in touch again.
Yeah. Yeah. And continue. Thanks for the session. I guess I have to. Yeah, my kids are already knocking on the door, so it's time for me.
Time to start the weekend.
No. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, guys, for a nice session. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, Diego.
Bye.